In this video, I'll show you how to sew the puff and pencil ruched dress from start to finish. Before we start sewing, make sure all your pattern pieces are cut out and that you've transferred all notches and markings to your fabric. All seam allowances in this pattern are 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch, unless I mention something else. Alright, let's get started. Start by ironing interfacing onto the wrong side of all facing pieces. Next, finish all raw edges and facings with a zigzag stitch or an overlocker. You don't need to finish the neckline, the longer shoulder edge, the drawstrings, or the casing. Now we'll attach the back facing to the back piece. Start by folding the back facing wrong sides together along the marked fold line. Place the back piece of the dress right side up. Lay the back facing on top with the right side facing down, aligning the fold of the facing with the center back of the dress. Stitch along the folded edge starting at the neckline with a seam allowance of 2 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch. Stop about 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch before the end of the facing. Now unfold the facing so the right side faces the right side of the back piece. Next to the first seam, sew another row of stitching with a 3 millimeter or 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Again, stop about 1 centimeter before the end. The two rows of stitching should be close together but leave just enough space between them to cut. Now cut carefully between the two rows of stitching from the neckline down, stopping 1 centimeter before the end. Press the facing flat. Now we'll create the ruched side seam. On both the front and back pieces, sew gathering stitches along the marked side seam. Set your machine to the longest stitch length and sew 2 rows of stitches from the marking below the armhole down to the marking at the hip. Sew the first row 0.5 centimeters or 1/4 of an inch from the edge. Sew the second row 1.5 centimeters or half an inch from the edge. Do not backstitch and leave long thread tails at both ends. Now gently pull the thread tails to gather the fabric. Distribute the gathers evenly between the markings until the ruched section measures 17 centimeters or 6 3/4 inches. Once you're happy with the gathers, set your stitch length back to normal and sew between the two gathering rows about 0.7 centimeters or 1/4 of an inch from the edge to secure the gathers. Now let's attach the zipper. Place the back piece right side up and place the front piece on top right side down. Sew the left side seam from the armhole down to the upper marking and again from the lower marking down to the hem. Backstitch securely at both ends. Between the two markings, sew with the longest stitch length. This is a temporary seam that will hold the fabric together while we attach the zipper. Press the seam allowance open from the armhole down to the hem. Now place the invisible zipper face down on top of the seam allowance. The slider should sit just below the upper marking, and the center of the zipper teeth should line up with the seam. Pin the zipper in place. Before sewing with the machine, baste the zipper by hand through the seam allowance only. Once the zipper is basted, carefully remove the temporary seam behind it between the two markings. This will give access to the zipper pull so you can open the zipper fully. Attach your zipper foot to the sewing machine and set the needle all the way to the left. Start sewing the first side of the zipper from the upper marking down to the lower marking. As you sew, gently roll the zipper coil away from the needle so you can stitch as close to the teeth as possible. Now set the needle all the way to the right and sew the other side the same way. Secure the extra zipper tape at the bottom with a few stitches or trim the excess. Then switch back to your regular presser foot and move the needle back to the center. Then carefully remove the gathering stitches. Now we're going to sew the side and shoulder seams. With the right sides together, sew the remaining side seam from the armhole down to the hem. Then sew the shoulder seams from the neckline out to the shoulder edge. Next, hem the bottom edge of the dress. Fold the hem up 2 centimeters or 3/4 of an inch and press it flat. Sew from the right side 1.5 centimeters or half an inch from the edge all the way around. Now we'll finish the armholes. Fold the armhole edge half a centimeter or 1/4 of an inch to the wrong side. Press and pin it in place. Sew around the armhole 0.3 centimeters or 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Now we're going to make the casing for the shoulder. Start by preparing the casing piece. Fold one short end 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch to the wrong side and press. Then fold both long edges 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch to the wrong side and press. Now the casing is ready to attach. Turn the dress so the wrong side faces out. Press the shoulder seams open. Trim the seam allowance to half a centimeter or 1/4 of an inch to avoid bulk. Place the casing along the shoulder seam with the wrong side of the casing against the wrong side of the dress. The folded short end should sit about half a centimeter or 1/4 of an inch from the armhole edge. The center of the casing should align with the shoulder seam, and the other end should extend into the neckline. Pin the casing in place. Turn the dress right side out. Stitch the casing in place by sewing directly along the shoulder seam and then along both sides of the casing. Make sure you do not sew across the two ends of the casing. Now we'll make the drawstrings. Fold the tie in half with wrong sides together. Fold the long edges of the tie piece 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch toward the center. Stitch 0.2 centimeters or 1/8 of an inch from the folded edge and along the folded short end. Repeat to make a second tie. Now we'll thread the ties. Attach a safety pin to the open end of one tie. Thread it through the casing from the armhole toward the neckline. Leave about 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch of the tie extending from the neckline so it can be secured. Repeat with the second tie. Now we'll finish the neckline. Place the front and back facings right side together and align the shoulder seams. Sew both shoulder seams. Place the neckline facing right sides together with the dress. Make sure the drawstrings and casing lie flat and extend slightly beyond the neckline. Sew around the neckline. Trim the seam allowance at the corners and cut small notches along the curved areas. Turn the facing to the inside of the dress and press the neckline flat. Understitch the facing where possible to help it stay on the inside. Secure the facing at the right shoulder seam. At the back, stitch the underlap to the right back piece with a short horizontal seam. Finally, sew the button and buttonhole. Attach the button onto the underlap about 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch from the edge. Create a horizontal buttonhole on the right back piece in the marked position. Test your buttonhole settings on your sewing machine on scrap fabric before sewing it on your dress. And that's it. Your ruched dress is finished. We'd love to see what you make, so don't forget to tag us and use the hashtag #PPRuched.